Herein lies the story of Countess Elizabeth Bathory de Exceed, born 7th of August 1560, died 21st of August 1614. She was a very rich noble lady who owned lands in Hungary, what are today known as Hungary, Slovenia, and Romania. She's now considered to be one of the most prolific female murderers of all time. Her death count stands between 80 and 650 people. She was known for her torture and brutality to young girls, mostly peasant girls from the surrounding villages, but later in life she escalated to killing noble women's daughters. Some consider her the first female vampire, as she was believed to bathe and drink the blood of her servant girls. Born in 1560, her family was very rich and she had everything she needed. She grew up in a very privileged household and wanted for nothing. During this time, many stories exist of her being sexually abused at a very young age, tortured, and even witnessing things untowards. All of it, however, is rumor. Others believe she might have suffered from seizures and perhaps had been epileptic. At the time, this was known as the falling sickness. A common treatment at this time was to put blood of a normal person on the lips. Perhaps she was just trying to cure herself with the blood. At the age of 10 years old, she was betrothed to her husband-to-be, Ferenc Nadasdy, a nobleman 4 years older than her. 5 years later, Elizabeth married Ferenc. The wedding is said to have had 4,500 people and continued for 3 days. Due to her position as a higher noblewoman than her husband, she insisted on keeping her last name. Her husband also became a Bathory. His wedding gift to her was his castle, Castle Sieste. Along with it was the villages surrounding it and homestead. She was to move into this home and spend the rest of her life there. 10 years after being married, they had their first daughter. According to her will, we believe she had 5 children, though there are rumors of a 6th who might have died at birth or possibly never existed. Another rumor following this was that she had a child out of wedlock with a peasant man. It wasn't long after they married that her husband went to wage war in the Long War from 1593 to 1606. He was also studying in Vienna at the time. Throughout their lives together, which spanned 29 years, not much of it was actually spent together. It is believed that during this period that he was away, she began her evil ways. Others believe she had witnessed torture at her parents' hands from a young age, or possibly from soldiers or other military men that surrounded her family. Perhaps she had become accustomed to it and found it normal. There are many stories about noble families at the time who committed acts of atrocity like this, and it was almost found to be normal. Peasants and other servants were routinely tortured, and this would not have been anything untowards. In fact, peasants were not even able to take their accusers to court if they were higher in standing to them. Another theory for her evil ways stems from her husband. Her husband also had a reputation for violence and torture on the battlefield. Being a soldier and leader of men at that time, this wasn't uncommon. Or possibly, maybe she was sick, maybe she was depraved, maybe it was always within her and this was just what she enjoyed doing. During the war, her husband was away fighting in different lands and she was left to take care of the castle and the surrounding lands. All reports from the time state that she was very good at this and a very capable leader. However, in 1604, shortly before the end of the war, her husband died. It was said that he felt a numbness in his legs and a pain, and never recovered, dying shortly after. In his will, he entrusted his family and his heirs to his good friend, Georgi Thurzo. This man would later be responsible for Elizabeth's downfall. Between 1602 and 1604, the rumors of her depraved ways had spread and become hard to ignore. Her typical victims were known to be between the ages of 10 and 14. When she first started, it was mostly local peasant girls. They were easy to make disappear, bury, or blame on other circumstances. She often told the families that they had died of cholera and she had had them buried. But as these girls became scared or were in low supply, she would increasingly lure the daughters of noble people surrounding her. None of these families were on the same level as her, but nonetheless, they were nobles. The rumors consisted of severe beatings, mutilation, burning and biting of the flesh were common. Freezing and death from starvation were also on her to-do list. Other rumors consist of her putting needles in body parts, such as fingers, and then when she would tell the servant that if they wanted to remove them, they could go right ahead. However, if they did, she would then remove the remainder of that body part. Other torture includes burning her victims with hot thongs and then placing them in ice baths. Another favorite was to cover them in honey and then let the bees and ants eat the honey off them, which would obviously include their skin. She also enjoyed eating flesh, the flesh of her victims. Perhaps she was a cannibal. The rumors of her drinking blood and bathing in it only came much later, after she was arrested and even after her death, suggesting they might have been exaggerations. When this case came to the attention of the king, he had to appoint someone to look into the matter. Her husband's good friend Thurzo was appointed to head the investigation. He gathered over 300 witness accounts. It was more than enough to bring her to justice. When she was arrested, she was found with 4 accomplices: Dorotoya Semtes, Ilona Joe, Katerina Banka, and Janos Uvari, also known as Ibis or Fico. However, due to her family's wealth and position, a public trial was to be avoided at all costs, and prison or execution were highly unlikely. 2 irregular trials were held after her arrest. She did not attend either of them. The actual evidence was surprisingly light, but nonetheless, she was placed under house arrest for the remainder of her natural life. On August 12, 1614, she complained to her jailer of cold hands. He told her it was nothing and to go to sleep. The next morning, she was found dead. Some believe the entire story was made up. All of it was an attempt to take her land and money. This was not an unheard of motive at the time. The entire plot might have been a conspiracy to get rid of her. After all, her husband had died, she was a widow, and a very wealthy one at that. Only after all this did her stories of blood drinking and bathing surface, leading many to believe they are embellishments to make the story sound better. Was she really innocent of it all? Not many direct testimonies and no official complaints until her arrest were ever lodged. However, would it be possible to find enough families to lie that their daughters had disappeared? It seems rather unlikely, but we'll never know as it was over 400 years ago. Most historians agree that she likely did commit these atrocious crimes. She had a love for torture and mutilation. Was it a sickness? Epilepsy she was trying to cure? Did her parents teach her violence? Or was it her husband? We'll never know. But what we can all agree on is that her mutilation and torture were unheard of at the time, and this was a time where torture and mutilation were very common. The other belief that she was a vampire on the level of Count Dracula, otherwise known as Vlad Tepes? Probably not. However, it does make a good story.